The VAR Show. The one place for your weekly football update.
So hello, a very warm welcome to the VAR show, the show which colleagues detail. Today we have a very special guest. We have Mr. Jesus, who kind of basically does what I do, but is way more experienced and did, and is even more finer like compared to what I ever can be till now or what I have been till now. So first of all, I would like to first thank James like in his busy day where he has already done 2 shows, at least by the tweet he put out. So thank you, James, for coming on the show. And I would like to begin by asking you, how are you and what are you doing these days?
Very well, thank you. First and foremost, hello to everybody in Nepal. I hope everybody's keeping well in these strange times and everybody's keeping safe. Thank you very much for the invite as well. Very much appreciated. To the new Nepalese public who are hearing me for the first time, my name is James Rowe. I'm a football writer based in the Netherlands. In Europe, I'm originally from the UK, and I have over 4.5 years experience in interviewing professional players and managers at all different levels of world football. And over in 3 interviews time in the early part of next month, I will go over the threshold of 300 interviews with the likes of Jamie Carragher, Simon Barker, Graham Potter, Bob Wilson, and many Dutch players as well, based in different countries as well as their own country. One of the things that I like to view as my unique selling point is the ability to interview Dutch players and managers in their mother tongue. You can find my work on @JamesRoweNL. I have 2 publishers in Football CFB and also the Secret Footballer website. So there's always new content coming at least once a week. And as I always say, every professional player and manager has a story to tell.
Definitely. And like, why interview? Like, how did that start?
Well, to take you back to the very beginning, Subhashis, I used to do translation work for a Dutch football website about Dutch football. And I would translate post-match press conferences and pre-match press conferences from Dutch players and Dutch managers. I would translate them from Dutch to English. And after doing that for 1 season, I decided to see if I could conduct my own interviews. And my very first interview was with the then manager of FC Den Bosch in the Dutch First Division. He was kind enough to invite me to the stadium to interview him about his managerial career and also his playing career. And then my first couple of interviews were exclusively with Dutch players and managers. And then I did a Dutch football podcast, and literally it's like a player who has a trial at a club and has a really good game. I did a podcast with World Football Index, and they asked me if they could publish my interviews going forward. And it meant that still interviewing Dutch players and managers, of course, but it meant branching out and speaking to the likes of Danny Cowley, who managed Lincoln City and Huddersfield, the likes of Graham Potter, who's now managing at Brighton. So it gave me an even bigger platform. And then World Football Index ended up publishing on more than 180 of my interviews. And then in the summer, I received overtures from Football CFB, which is a football website ran by Callum McFadden, who does audio interviews with players and managers. And he asked if he could publish my written interviews on his site. And then out of the blue last October, the publishers of the Secret Footballer franchise in the UK, who've written books about the ins and outs of football, that very same publisher got in contact with me to ask if they could publish my future interviews and also back catalogue. So they're now the biggest publisher that I have, with I think a Twitter handle of more than 100,000 people. So it means on that basis alone that more than 100,000 people a week are reading my written interviews. It's nice as well to speak to players and managers from the women's game. I have a good body of work regarding the women's game. Half of the Dutch national team that started the World Cup final, I've managed to speak to them. The likes of Jodie Taylor as well, the likes of Helen Ward at Wales, and Chloe Lacasse, my most recent women's interview, is currently striker of the women's team of Benfica. So it's really nice to look back on a great body of work as I keep to build the reputation. And the main goal, Subhashish, is to work one day on the media side of a professional football club. That's the main goal for me, because you're sowing all these seeds to make sure that you're dealing with all these people, and you're making sure that you're gaining so much knowledge and so much depth about what's gone before, and also the current day as well. Because football is very much a world game. We see at club level, we see at international level, countries making progress. We see that World Cups are also expanding, that women's football is also expanding. So it's about making sure that you give everybody the respect. And as I say, everybody has a story to tell.
Definitely. And like, I wanted to ask, why written? Like, because generally, like these days, you have most of them branch out into maybe podcast or vodcast, like video. Do you think, like, because you do the written part, it keeps you, maybe distinguishes you from the crowd?
Yes, I think it's a great question as well. Thank you very much for such a great observation. Primarily, I get a lot of overtures, Subhashish, about going onto YouTube, but I try to explain to them, if I sit down with a Dutch player or a Spanish player, that interview is conducted entirely in their mother tongue. There is no English to be heard, no English to be found. And it's very easy, from my point of view, to translate from Dutch to English quite quickly. Very easy. But obviously with YouTube, with making the video, piecing the video together, to do a written translation from audio Dutch to written English, for me, is very easy and not very time consuming. But if you compare that to YouTube, for example, where everything is live, everything is, and it's conducted in one language, and then afterwards you'd have to translate it into English and then use subtitles and put those subtitles on the video. At the moment, I'm a one-man band with two publishers, and that's enough for me. If the day comes where an ESPN, for example, or a BBC would do that for me, then that's fine. But it's about making sure that you know what you're doing. As I say, a little bit old school as well, but it's something I enjoy as well. You know, especially with the players and managers that maybe people have forgotten about. It's always nice to ask different questions rather than the obvious questions. It's always nice to pick little interesting pieces out and really go for the positive piece about what a player experienced, because they're not just professional footballers, they're also human beings. And when they go to play in a different country, they come up against many trials and tribulations, and it's nice to do everybody justice. I look back with pride on a wonderful portfolio the last 4.5 years, and it's great on the LinkedIn side that many clubs have viewed my profile and important people at clubs, which gives me an awful lot of confidence. But I'm hoping sooner rather than later that one of those views of the profile would result in a James, are you free for a meeting or a Zoom call next Wednesday, perhaps?
Definitely, and hopefully it happens soon.
Let's hope so.
And also, I think, I don't know how you find it easy, but I think it's a very, very tough job. Converting the language. I had to do it for few of my personal interviews, where I had to probably from my mother tongue Nepali to maybe to English. Because you don't find certain words are there which you cannot translate it into English, and if you do not have those words, then probably the meaning of the sentence changes.
Yes, but it keeps you sharp, and you have to be aware that you've got to get it 100% correct, and if that means that you take a little bit of time, then that means you take a little bit more time. And with the written pieces and with my written interviews, I have that time. And it's always about, finding a good order. I've often had a spells where I've had a lot of famous names consecutively. And people would often say, "Oh, you look back on big names in a short succession." But I like to think about the Dutch player playing in Sweden or the Dutch player playing in Denmark, that when their time comes for our interview to be published, their interview is just as important. There's no hairs and graces between the difference of speaking to one player or another. The only thing that changes, of course, is the language upon which I'm interviewing in. Normally, it's done in English, normally, but obviously when speaking to Dutch players and managers, and when speaking to Spanish players and managers, it's conducted in their mother tongue, and it kind of helps me to stand out, because there's not many British football writers that can speak in another language. We do exist over the world, but we're from a country where people think that the whole world speaks English, when that's not true. Before the COVID outbreak, I was very fortunate to travel substantially for nigh on 15 years, or more than 15 years, and you see a lot of the world, and you become very tolerant about other countries, other cultures. And Subhashish, I always like to turn it around a little bit. They say that the whole world speaks English. Well, I like to turn it around and show that there are British people in the world that, if you didn't know, when you hear them speak a foreign language, if you didn't know they were British, then you would think they were native. Like, for example, in the Netherlands, I've had people through the years. I've been living here for nearly 15 years, and I've had people in different environments say to me, "James, was your mother English, or was your father English?" And I said, I was born and raised in England. And they don't believe me, Subhashish. Some of them don't believe me. And it's testament to how hard I've worked to learn the language to the best of my ability. But I always like to tell a story of here in the Netherlands, when you arrive, you are given the tools and you are given encouragement to follow the official language course. And I followed it in the course year of 2005 and 2006. And I remember the first night, Subhashish, we were 20 people in a room, from Turkey, from New Zealand, from France, from Germany. It was like a United Nations. When it came to the final exam, there was 4 of us left, and I was the only male. Everybody else had decided to stop, or they found it too difficult. And for me, it was a huge challenge. And you literally, I've never worked so hard in all my life. Never. I don't think I'll ever work as hard again. But it's meant that when you're dealing with the Dutch public, when you're dealing with professional players and managers, that they feel so at ease that you are completely on point. There is nothing that gets lost in translation. It's making sure that everything is correct, and it's important when you get opportunities at a young age. I first arrived in the Netherlands as a tourist in 2003, and I returned home after watching my team Arsenal play Ajax, and I said to my mother, I said, "I've seen the future." And she said, "What are you talking about?" I said, I'm going to go and move to the Netherlands." And she said, "James, you've only been back 2 hours." I said, "Just you watch." And then I had a spell, Subhashish, where I was working and going about my daily life and going to watch Arsenal. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, there's an opportunity there. There's an amazing opportunity. I've got to carve it out. And 2 years after first coming here, I emigrated here. And in just over 3 months' time, I look and celebrate on a 15 years here, and it's been an amazing journey. And we're not finished yet, of course. But if you'd have told me that not only do you move there, but you establish yourself and then you go on to interview primarily Dutch players and managers in their mother tongue before branching out to all levels of world football, I would have said you was mad. But it just goes to show that if you give it everything you've got, and as well as I say, going back to my earlier point, a lot of British people get a bad name with learning foreign languages, but we do exist, and there are some excellent people out there. I mean, you only have to look at Tim Vickery, who is the BBC South American correspondent of football. He's absolutely amazing, absolutely world class, not just in terms of language ability in Portuguese, but also the depth of his knowledge. And the same with Graham Hunter as well, being in Spain for a long, long time. So there are British people that can do it, and we do exist. And it's about making sure that you never give in, never give in. I remember I had days where I started learning the language and I would read children's books, and I would be in the tram going to the city centre, and there's me, a 21-year-old man, sitting on a tram seat reading a children's book, and then people are looking at me funny. And I remember one person tapped me on the shoulder one day and they said, "Oh, are you not a little bit too old to be reading children's books?" And I answered them in their own language, telling them, "I'm originally from England. I've only been living here 5 months. I'm attempting to learn your language to the best of my ability, and I'm not doing too bad." And they were shocked. They were shocked. And then you have these moments where you go up in levels, because it's simply not the case of learning the base and then you're ready. It's all about it's like preparing a dinner. One person will one part will be this kind of food, the next part will be the next kind of food, and you literally never stop learning. I mean, when I started to read Dutch autobiographies about the likes of Louis van Gaal and Frank Rijkaard, you learn about them in their mother tongue. And every word that you don't necessarily understand, you write it down and you learn it, and you never forget it. I remember this will make Manchester United fans laugh a little bit. I read an autobiography that was written by a Dutch author about Louis van Gaal, and there was a word that kept coming up, and I was like, what is this word? And it was a word which means eigen geleid, which means headstrong. And for the people that know of Louis van Gaal, he's extremely headstrong in terms of his focus and in terms of his ability, because he quite clearly is one of the best managers of his generation. So it's just about catching opportunities at a young age, never giving in, and it's great to look back on a great portfolio as well. And I mean, I'm originally from England. Before the COVID outbreak, I would return to the UK to see family and friends and watch my football team Arsenal play. And you see how you want the country to do well. It's not that you've left and you think, oh, it doesn't matter anymore. I still have family and friends that live there. I want them to do well. I want them to be successful, and I want them to prosper. But you see the differences between the two countries, Subhashish. There's the differences of the Netherlands and Great Britain are quite big in many respects.
Yeah, definitely. And you touched on a lot of points there where I can go on talking for a lot and ask a lot of questions, but I'll try to focus it all on you. And of course, for me, if I have to prepare for an interview, if I have someone coming over, or if I have to talk about a topic, then I'll probably read the article, because it's easier to find out what I want to read. Whereas if you have in a video format, nowadays you have the timestamp, or else you have to go through the entire video, which may be 1 hour long, to probably know. But in reading, you have it segregated, this is the question, this is the answer, this is the question, this is the answer, and you have it generally it is like that in that format in what interviews probably you do. So
yes,
but I wanted to ask, but I think the good part about the video is people can't pick up quotes and use it without giving you reference. If your interview is there, they can pick up the full interview, and probably you won't get the due credit for it. But whereas in video, you cannot do that generally. Do you think that is bad?
Well, personally, everyone has their own way. And if you see the growth of YouTube in particular, some people where it's all about the views, it's all about the likes. You're not in competition with anybody else but yourself. And maybe I'm a little bit old-fashioned. I used to read World Soccer magazine religiously when I was a teenager. I used to study the results section that used to come. I'm showing my age here. The results section of World Soccer used to come in green pages, and I would study them, and I would see that, for example, games are being played in Yerevan and Chisinau and Lisbon. And I would think, in terms of international football as well, it's the same with African football, with games being played in the Ivory Coast and in Abidjan and Cairo and Rabat, for example. And it kind of whets your appetite to make sure that you don't forget that football is a world game. I mean, I've spoken to a few African players as well, the likes of Stanley Amuzi, who won the African Cup of Nations with Nigeria, and Arnold Origi, who was capped by his country of Kenya, and also recently Hassan Sisso's the Gambian striker of FC Zurich in Switzerland. And the pride that he had in terms of describing his country and his people, because I think with the international game as well, we are focusing on a European Championship here in the Netherlands that's been postponed, and also as well in a World Cup next year in Qatar, and then it's the last World Cup before it goes to 48 nations. And I think to myself, if you see the growth of the tournament, where it started originally as 4, then 8, then 16, and then 24, 32, and now 48, it's assembling a world football meeting rather than a tournament. Because I try to explain to people that you can go back in history. Like, you take recent World Cups, like 1990, England reached the semi-final. 94, Bulgaria reached the semi-final. 98, Croatia reached the semi-final. 2002, South Korea, of course. And I try to let people know that in tournament football, you're always going to get surprises. Always. But it's not just a case that you have a surprise. The country that springs the surprise is they are the ones motivating the next generation of talent in that country. Like I was fortunate enough recently to speak to Mark Rutte, who managed Willem II here in the Netherlands, and he was asked by the Moroccan National Football Association to go to Morocco and to kind of reinvigorate the youth of the national team. And my interview with him is released on the 3rd of March, but I'll give you a little bit of a snippet beforehand. He was telling me that they had to find the best Moroccan talent they could find. But the youth academies of the clubs, such as Fez or Wydad Casablanca or Raja Casablanca, the youth academies didn't have a lot of money. So they had to kind of think outside the box and get players at an early age. And you had the likes of Armit Narit and also the likes of Hakim Achraf Hakimi and also Maswari from Ajax as well. So it's about identifying talent, and especially in Africa, you've got differences between North African nations and South African nations in terms of physicality and technical ability. But my interview with him, for example, was conducted in his mother tongue. And it was really nice to delve deep about his experiences at club level, but also at international level too.
Definitely. And I think when you spoke about Morocco, I think you have, Ocean Roberts as a technical director who is quite good. He has performed extremely well for Wales also, like in his past. So I think he'll have a positive influence, and he's having with the players that are being produced right now. Definitely. And I'll move on from that. And do you think like your interviews, do you do it audio? Do you record audio, or do you record it like direct written?
I always record the interview. The interview is always recorded, so there's always an audio recording. But then, of course, if it's conducted in Dutch, it's then translated from Dutch to English. If it's conducted in Spanish, it's translated from Spanish to English. But you always have the audio because it's important to double check the facts. There are a lot of things that you can find on the internet. It's a tremendous resource for the world. But if you really need to find that player, if you really need to find, for example, somebody might say the pronunciation of a player, and you might think that's how you write it, but then you go and search out the correct spelling as well, even if it's a certain apostrophe, even if it's an extra letter being added. It's got to be spot on. It's got to be perfect, and I think that's part of my way due to the personality wise as well. And you've also got to enjoy what you do, because I remember when I started out on the journey, it comes so fast. And you have you get phone calls from people that you used to watch on TV, and you think, my goodness. But you have to remain professional, and you have to. I'm fortunate now, Subhashish, where the reputation is preceding me in football. It's such a small world, and I'm thankfully in a position now where the players and managers are approaching me, and in terms of the Dutch players and managers as well, it's always one might have spoken to someone I'd spoken to before, and you get so much more out of it. But it's always about concentrating on what the next one is, and just making sure that you do everybody justice, because everyone has a story to tell, and we're in a sport at the minute where it's always about the here and now. People don't necessarily think about what went before, and I think that's very important to bring that to the fore on most occasions.
Definitely. And you said like how you get, once you are into it, probably after you get the hang of it, probably you get calls from people whom you watch on TV. When did you first have that experience, and with whom?
Oh, well, I'll let you know. It's a good question as well. I put in a request to Lincoln City to speak to the then manager Danny Cowley, who is still one of the best young managers in English football. He got his team to the quarterfinals of the FA Cup, where they lost to Arsenal, and I put in a request to speak to him, and I didn't receive any feedback. And I thought, okay, not to worry, these things happen. And then it was one Friday afternoon, my telephone rang. And it was, "Hello, James, it's Danny Cowley." I was like, "Hello." He said, "James," he said, "I must tell you," he said, "I must be completely honest with you. Very rarely do I do telephone interviews. I mean, normally I would do face-to-face, and telephone a real mixture. But obviously, if you're dealing with people in different countries, it's not always possible to do face-to-face." But he said to me, he said, "Very rarely do I do telephone interviews, but I've read some of your work, and it's really, really good, and I'm more than happy to help you." And when that phone call took place, I thought, the train has left the station now, and we're on our way. And I recently had an interview with the two interviews I've done where people of a very high standing have been very complimentary. And one of them was the Assistant Chief Executive of the English Professional Football Association, in Simon Barker. And he spoke to me at the end of our interview, and he said to me, "James," he said, "I must be honest with you, we are always very wary about the people that we're talking to." He said, "But the way you go about your business and the way you conduct yourself, and in terms of preparation, it's a throwback to an era which has gone before." So he was very complimentary about that. And then finally as well, Scottish manager Craig Brown. I interviewed him about a month and a half ago now. And he said to me, he said, "James," he said, "listening to you speak and your mannerisms and your knowledge, it reminds me very much of the technical director who I had at Preston, Tony Scholes, who's now a chief executive at Stoke City." And I come away from that telephone call, Subhasish, and I thought, although I harbour ambitions to be on the media side of a professional club, who's to say that once you're in that world that you can't become a technical director, that you can't become a chief executive? Because I've dealt with players, managers, technical directors, physios, referees, agents. I've dealt with literally all facets of world football since 2016. So what you're doing is you're laying the seeds where if the day does come and a club does come in and say, "I think we've seen enough now, would you like to work on our media team?" then you won't get phased because you've dealt with it before. The same way if I'm lucky enough to work for a club one day, and to give an example, can you imagine working for a club one day and there's a Dutch player coming to view the club, and the club ask me to give him a tour and his family regarding the football club? And you imagine that young player being from Alkmaar, being from Utrecht, being from Rotterdam or Amsterdam, and arriving at that football club, and the first person that greets you is the person that greets you in your mother tongue, is able to explain to you in your mother tongue everything which is going on. And I'd like to think that could be the difference between them wanting to sign for the club and maybe not wanting to sign for the club. So it's very important how language can play a massive part in your life, and I'm hoping that it will be an extra gift and an extra skill that I'll be able to show in different ways and different facets in the future.
Definitely, and I wish you all the best for that. Hope to see you someday, like in some role that you probably even did not hope for, and you exceed your expectations.
I hope so. Thank you very much. As I say, it's been a great journey so far, and you always want more, and especially with the LinkedIn profiles and you see like the national emblem of the Netherlands and the national emblem of England and the Republic of Ireland and clubs such as Bayern Munich, Fulham, and Aston Villa, and you think, oh, you know, these are reputable clubs, and but you just have to keep giving everything you've got and never giving in. You know, there are a lot of people. I get a lot of questions from a lot of people, Subhashish, who say to me, "How do you do this? How do you do that?" You know, you have to find your way, and it's simply not the case of falling into it. In the beginning, I would go to places where Dutch people would hardly go, such as Venlo and Zwolle, Breda, and Enschede as well, to interview players and managers that were not very well known. But without those people, I wouldn't be speaking to the likes of a Jamie Carragher or speaking to the likes of a Simon Barker or a Bob Wilson, who's an Arsenal legend. So, you know, you got to remember, you got to enjoy the hard work as well. It's always something which is important.
No, that is, I agree, like 100% of it. And you know, like you need to have, I mean, it's like a ladder where you probably require the downmost ladder as much as the one you reach on top. And maybe Jamie Carragher, like you said, is on the topmost, and maybe someone who interviewed first was the downmost, who probably helped you or even improved your experience.
Absolutely. To give you an example, I'll give you an example. When I interviewed the very first manager, William Vloet, who was manager of FC Den Bosch, he also managed Sparta Rotterdam and also managed ADO Den Haag. And he told me that he received overtures from an English club. And it was my very first interview, so I didn't want to push my luck. I didn't want to be rude by asking him what club it was. But then you learn with experience, where I think I'd had between 50 and 75 interviews. And the same revelation came again by another manager. And then I asked him, drawing on my experience, I asked him, may I ask you which club it was? And they elaborated on that. So it's all about the experience of, you know, the very first time that you do something, and you want to give a good base, and you want to make sure that you do everything really, really well. And it's just been a great journey so far. And I remember doing a podcast about the England national team, and a fellow podcaster congratulating me on reaching 100 interviews, and then he said, maybe here's to reaching 200. I said, I'm not too sure about that. And then in 3 interviews time, it is 300. So there is no limit to this. It's always about making sure that you take your chances. Sometimes you receive correspondence a little bit longer than you have to wait a little bit longer, but you just have to remain patient and realize that you're dealing with human beings, and you're dealing with professionals, players and managers, so you've got to get it right.
Definitely. And you know, like if you had to choose one interview which stands out the most for you, which one would that be?
It's a very difficult question to ask. It's a very difficult question to answer as well. I like to turn it around, Subhashish, where I don't have one favourite interview, but I do have watershed interviews. And I'll give you a couple of watershed interviews. And what I mean by that is that you come away from those interviews realising that the game has changed, that you are no longer just any old football writer. You are one with a substantial portfolio of players with all different standings in the game. I mentioned the first one, of course, William Vloet. I believe that Danny Cowley as well, because that was the first one that gave me the feeling that, you know, this is something which is going to take off. Simon Barker, with, you know, being assistant chief executive at the PFA and having such a standing in the game to be so complimentary, made me feel 10 feet tall. And also Jamie Carragher as well, you know, being a one club man, you know, representing England. And I remember what he said to me, you know, that playing for England, there was a level of expectation in the golden generation. And one thing he said that stuck with me was also, you know, that they were labelled the golden generation, but people forget the teams that Italy and France had at those times were also a fantastic generation of players. And finally, in terms of watershed interviews, I think, obviously being a football writer, but being an Arsenal fan, to speak to the legendary goalkeeper in Bob Wilson for 40 minutes about his journey becoming an Arsenal legend. And, he represents everything which is good about Arsenal Football Club. And to have spoken to him for 40 minutes and to hear about for example, for Nepal fans that might not know, obviously people know about Bergkamp, people know about Thierry Henry, people know about Arsene Wenger. I went to my first ever Arsenal match in 1991, but I was also raised as an Arsenal fan to realise that the 1970-1971 season, where Arsenal won the league and cup double, that was one of the finest football teams ever to be produced by Arsenal. And for him to be the goalkeeper of that, and for him to tell me how they lost the 1969 League Cup final to Swansea, and Swansea were at the time third division team, not expected to win, and they did. And Arsenal were kind of branded the shame of London, and they wanted to really fight back and say that that's not the case. And to hear how the seeds were sown that led to that team coming together was very special indeed.
Definitely. And do you think do you see interview as a stepping stone to maybe something else bigger in your career?
I think it's a little bit too early to tell. I'm open to many things. Obviously, I'm a huge football fan. I like to do my due diligence. Also, like to travel. Also, have a slight interest in politics and world affairs. But I think it's important to carry on the road that you know. And should any opportunities come up, then we'll just have to wait and see. But I'm open to many different avenues and to potential offers and ideas that people might have. And it's about making sure that you have a good grounding and also respecting people as well, because you're dealing with human beings. So a very interesting question once again, and we shall see what the future will bring.
Definitely. So I will not hold you a lot longer. I'll ask you last few questions because I guess you're just standing up and talking, so I'm already feeling uncomfortable.
No, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. Your questions are really interesting as well, which is really good. But yeah, it's good for the exercise. Good to keep fit, of course. So no, that's absolutely fine. Ask as many questions as you like in that respect.
Okay. Then it's fine. I thought it's uncomfortable even seeing you, stand for close to almost 40 minutes now.
No, it's fine. It's good for the exercise.
Okay. So the question just slipped out from my mind, but I'll ask you another one. Like you said, how you do the interviews, and do you send out a copy, or do the interviewee ask for a copy before it releases?
Sometimes, not always. Sometimes I've had players and managers that have wanted to see that. Some have primarily asked for it, but it's a real mix. Everybody's different. It's not a one size fits all policy. Sometimes I'll have players and managers that will inquire about that possibility. Some may not, and it's about making sure that you are open and that you deal with everybody, and if a request does come in, that you're open-minded enough to find the best solution.
And you have spoken to so many people, and do you think for you it's a very big thing when you interview someone, because for you it's maybe your first time interaction, maybe with Jamie Carragher it was a first time interaction with him, but do you think for them they don't even care much, because for them it's maybe Carragher had to release a book, so he had to do 10 interviews to maybe promote his book?
Well, I can only draw on my own experience, Subhashish, and that is thankfully my name is starting to kind of precede me a little bit, where football is such a small world. I've had players who I've spoken to who've told me they've read my interviews with other players and managers. So I didn't even tell them, and they would tell me in conversation, "Oh, I read your interview with that person. Oh, I read your interview with that person." So then you know that you're doing something right. But there's so many people trying to get into such a small space. You can only be yourself, and you can't copy anyone. People often say to me about people that you look up to and things like that. You can admire people such as in my case, obviously, the old football commentator Barry Davis, absolute world class in terms of poise, in terms of information. Tim Vickery as well is an excellent credit to his profession in Rio de Janeiro. He's been there for such a long time. But even in terms of the amazing knowledge and the amazing quality, you're not going to find it you're not going to find it every day, and that's why it's so good. But you must find your own way. You must find your own way. And I think in the world we live in at the minute, everyone likes to kind of think, oh, they see somebody doing something and they want to emulate that. But the most important thing is to find your own way.
Definitely. And I'm trying to ask you questions from what I have experienced probably, and probably I just wanted to maybe cross check if you have experienced something similar. Have you ever been called for an interview and maybe the interview that does not show up for some reason over the call or something?
Sometimes I've had where they've got hold of me to say that they've got other commitments, but there again, you have to be flexible. I'll give you a little anecdote. I don't know if you remember the former Southampton defender of FC Twente, Jos Højfeldt. He played for Southampton. I was due to ring him, and I rang him at the time we arranged, and he said, James, I'm really looking forward to speaking to you, but I'm currently in the middle of moving. I'm moving a house. Could we rearrange our interview for a couple of days' time? I said, that's no problem. And, sometimes people might be driving a car, so safety is paramount. Sometimes they might have to stop the car or wait until they get home, So normally face-to-face interviews as well that pre-COVID were possible. But obviously at all levels of world football now, obviously you've got maybe Zoom calls or, normal telephone calls. But it's always about being flexible. It's not about, I always say it's not about me. It's got nothing to do with me. All I am is just I am the one who kind of gives the story of the player to the world, and the world can do with it what they like. Some people like it, some people might not, but it's always nice to tailor make the interviews and make sure that you come away from the interview knowing that you've done everything you can.
Definitely, and that's, I think, you have had a very good experience then, probably not many no shows or proper explanations. So I'll literally ask you last few questions before we wrap up. And in terms of you said you have been with the Secret Footballer of late. I think last year you said, and I have read two copies of this. I don't remember which one it was. I read last year among various others that they have produced. Who is the Secret Footballer? Have you met him?
No idea. And people naturally think that I know. I have no idea.
No, you should be knowing.
I have no idea. Again, it comes down to professionalism. I will tell you how it went. Obviously, the publisher who's published the Secret Footballer books, that very same publisher was the people that got in contact with me, and it was a strange day because I went to play. Our COVID rules were then relaxed. I went to play some pool at the pool hall in Amsterdam. And then I arranged with my friends to go to my friend's house to watch the Manchester City Arsenal game. And then I returned home and I checked my emails, and it was the initial correspondence from the people at the Secret Footballer. So, you speak with the people at the Secret Footballer. But again, it comes down to professionalism. I don't know who it is. I don't have a wish to know who it is, neither. Again, it comes down to professionalism, Subhashish, where a publisher who's published reputable books and has sold lots and lots of books that is well known within the United Kingdom are offering me and wanting me to say yes to publishing my interviews on their website and also future and back catalogue interviews. So you've got to look at the opportunity being offered to you, because they could have offered it to anybody. But they've obviously seen something in my work, and it's starting to really take off now. With the likes of Chloe Lacasse of Benfica women's striker, stories from all different levels of world football as well. So for a site where the majority of the fans were only really aware and only really acquainted with British football, Now they are seeing stories from Switzerland, Denmark, Portugal, Africa, and they think, goodness, where has this come from? But it's come from a huge experience that I have interviewing players and managers, and it's nice to offer the people something different.
So yeah, so I'll ask you two more before we wrap up. And the first one is do you set a goal for yourself? Okay, I have to do this many interviews in this month or something, or is
No,
it something? Okay.
no, it's all got to happen naturally. There's no, for example, you submit requests. Some of the requests come in quite quickly. Some of them you have to wait a little bit. Sometimes you'll receive information from regarding the player or manager that you want to speak to. Sometimes you'll receive a contact detail. Sometimes they'll let you know about commitments that they have. For me, there is no that something's got to be done within this time. At the time of speaking, what I have is once a week, the Secret Footballer on a Wednesday, they publish one of my interviews. My other publisher in Football CFB, they publish my interviews every Monday, and then they do an archive feature on a Friday, where my interview from a previous publisher, where they want to put back into the spotlight, might be put out to a new audience. So at the moment, two different publishers, one being bigger than the other, are publishing my new work every week, and it's great to look back on. I'm very proud of particularly of what interviews are coming up, and everyone has a story to tell, and it's about making sure that you don't forget the smaller players and managers as well as the bigger players and managers. It's a world game, and fortunate to be in a very good position, but testament to the hard work, really.
Definitely. And even I have done quite a few. I think like once you do it and it just keeps rolling, I think like once one happened, one you don't realize what it just happens. And I think last month I did my 200 like in during that. Like, I think in the past 1 year or 1.5 year. So it was like quite hectic. It has been like.
Yeah, but it's also what is important is to also rest properly. Like I get a lot of people saying to me, "Oh, did you watch football last night?" Not always, because if you're involved in that world where almost every day of your life you're speaking to maybe one player or manager, or you're having correspondence, or you're writing an interview, you've always got to have a little bit of rest. So sometimes if you're listening to music, sometimes I'll go and play pool. Sometimes I'll watch a little bit of news and see what's going on in the world. So you also have to find a good balance.
No, yeah, what you say makes sense because I think like I cannot watch football if I am having to interview someone related to that, because then you'll have a bias when you speak, probably, I think, because of the game. Like, what would you normally ask, or in a clean when you don't have bias? Probably, if you're watching, suppose Liverpool versus Everton, and if you had to interview Jurgen Klopp after the game, if you're watching the game, then you would have your questions will generally pertain mostly to the game.
Yes, you would, but again, it comes back to that point I made about professionalism, where it's not about me, it's about them. And I must say one point I'd like to make is, obviously I'm a football writer with a lot of experience, but when I see some writers of English football clubs, face to face and eye to eye with some of the biggest managers in the game, they could achieve so much more. But I'll give you an example. Mikel Arteta is Arsenal manager, is manager of the team that I support. I've seen some football writers who work for reputable newspapers. I've seen them ask him for his opinion about Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang's haircut. It's completely irrelevant. It's got nothing to do. There's so much more that can be achieved. Like, for example, Jurgen Klopp. Jurgen Klopp is doing a tremendous job at Liverpool, but Jurgen Klopp also had a spell managing Mainz and also managing Dortmund. If some can use their brain, if I was sat opposite Jurgen Klopp, and when they had that spell where they didn't win for 4 games, I would ask him, do you draw on any experiences that you have now that you might have had at Dortmund and you might have had at Mainz. Because I think foreign managers that come to the Premier League, I think a lot of them would dearly love to talk about what's gone before. But I don't think that a lot of football writers actually have the courage to actually ask them. Like, I mean, if you say to me, if you're speaking to Arteta, it's not just about Arsenal, it's also about his playing career. He also played for Paris Saint-Germain. In terms of Klopp managing Mainz and Dortmund, in terms of Carlo Ancelotti playing for AC Milan, in terms of Chris Wilder, although his team is struggling at the moment at the foot of the Premier League. I've spoken to players that have played under him, Subasic, who are, some of the stories they've told me are absolutely amazing. I'll give you one story. Chris Wilder is currently a manager of Sheffield United. I spoke to Sam Deering, who played under Chris Wilder at Oxford, and Sam Deering was doing really, really well. And he on the eve of the season, he broke his leg, and he thought, "Oh, I'm going to be forgotten about this season. Nobody's going to want to know me. Nobody's going to pay any attention to me." And this is, bearing in mind, this is the third division, and Chris Wilder is saying to him, "We will get you the best medical attention you can get. You will come back, and you will make an important. You will be an important part of our push for promotion." And he was. And the same with Ian Morris at Northampton. Ian Morris dislocated, playing for Northampton under Chris Wilder at Northampton. Ian Morris dislocated his kneecap, and he feared for his career. He was in agony. He feared for his career. And Chris Wilder himself even said, that's the worst injury I've ever seen. But he said, "Don't worry about it. We're going to give you everything you need." And Ian Morris made his comeback on the training pitch, and all of a sudden there's a massive round of applause which is broken out from the manager, from the assistant manager, and the whole squad. And Chris Wilder is saying, "Look, here is an example, regardless of level, where somebody who feared for their career initially has now got themselves back to playing again, and they managed to achieve promotion." And if you look at the managers of the Premier League, Scott Parker as well. Scott Parker is doing an amazing job at Fulham. I was fortunate to interview his former Charlton teammate, Jonathan Fortune. Scott Parker, when he signed for Chelsea, Scott Parker made a speech in the dressing room where he said to all his teammates, "It's got nothing to do with you guys. I love being here. It's great to play for Charlton, but the opportunity I've been offered at Chelsea and what it can do for my family and what it can do for my future, I can't turn it down." And he didn't. And this is what I mean about, obviously, I'm in a privileged position. I'm doing very well, very grateful. But I think at the top end as well, in the recent examples I gave regarding managers in the Premier League, if people just had a little bit more foresight to ask them about what's gone before, it would also make press conferences a lot more interesting. So it's about always, timing is very important. And it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward.
Definitely. And yeah, I totally concur with whatever you said. And I'll end it up with one final question. And if suppose you had to give an advice to yourself before you started your first interview, what advice would you give yourself?
Don't forget that at different points of this journey, you've got to enjoy it. Don't forget that. Because I'm not trying to give any critique, but there has been moments where I might not have enjoyed it as much as I could have done. I'll give you an example. Dennis Bergkamp is the greatest Arsenal player I've ever seen, and I'm fortunate enough now to live in his home country, to live in his hometown, in his country, and speak his language. His nephew Roland Bergkamp played for Brighton and Hove Albion, and played for Excelsior Rotterdam. And I put in a request to speak to Roland in September 2017. And he was playing for the Dutch side RKC Waalwijk at the time. And he invited me down. Obviously, I'm based in Amsterdam, so I took the train from Amsterdam to Hertogenbosch, and then I took a bus from Hertogenbosch to Waalwijk. And I went to the stadium to speak to Roland. And of course, the interview is all about Roland Bergkamp. It's got nothing to do with his uncle. But of course, there was one particular question that I wanted to ask him. I said, Roland, I said, your uncle Dennis is one of the greatest players of his generation. Did you ever receive any particular advice or encouragement from him? He said, well, to be honest, James, I didn't see him very much. He said, but I became an Arsenal fan because of him. You know, you wouldn't see him for 80 minutes, but he'd be the one to give the defence splitting pass. He would be the one to score the goal. And when I was on my journey home, I received a message from my sister that says, you know, you need to think what you've done today, where a fellow footballer of the Bergkamp family, I spoke to him for 45 minutes. And if you'd have said to me, as I was a young Arsenal fan growing up watching Dennis Bergkamp, for example, that you will go on to interview his nephew in his mother tongue, I would have said you was mad. And the opportunities that it provides. But the most important thing is to enjoy it. You've got to enjoy it. It's not about the here and now. It's about the journey. And you know, I'm fortunately in a position, Subhashish, where within the 5 years, I've given myself half a chance of fulfilling the dream of working for a professional football club on the media side. I hope people are looking. I know people are looking, and timing is very much important. So we shall see. And if it's meant to be, it's meant to be.
Definitely, and I wish you all the best for that. And James, thank you so much for talking to me. And this has turned out to be maybe an interview masterclass with James. You know, like where
Yes.
you answer all the questions about maybe about Netherlands and life and much more than football.
Yeah, of course. We can call this one part one, can't we?
Yeah. Of course, we can call it part one. You can always come whenever. You're always welcome. You know, like for
Thank
audio
you very
pod.
much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions as well. Very informative, very interesting. For the people that have enjoyed today and enjoyed me speaking about football, if you'd like to follow me on @JamesRoweNL on Twitter, you can always get in touch at any time. Any opinions about football, any interview stories that you might want to ask me about that you've read about before. So I always try to get back to people as often as possible. And who knows, I may say hello in person to the Nepalese public one day.
Definitely, and hope to maybe see you here someday in some capacity as some whatever you want to be, and even more than that.
Yes, let's hope so. Thanks once again for a lovely interview. Really enjoyed it, and sending my best wishes to everybody in Nepal. And stay safe, and we'll speak again in future.
Same to you. Thank you and bye.
Bye bye.
Player-wise, it would have to be Steven Gerrard, just because again before he became a journalist, you know, he was someone I just admired massively in terms of the absolute complete footballer. I think if you were trying to like make a footballer in a factory, it would be Steven Gerrard, someone who, you know, I think JB Carragher summed it up best once when he said, you know, Steven Gerrard's biggest strength is he doesn't have any weaknesses.
The stadium. I don't see really need to do that. Mainly such a big spending. But it's true that it would be a fantastic stadium. That's not bad, but you have to be careful. And mainly at this moment when we are going to face a very difficult time.